The 6 contenders from the last debate have already qualified. One more candidate has to, and that's Andrew Yang.
We are back with Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins and White House reporter Gabby Orr. So this is exciting for Yang supporters. He has now had enough polls to qualify him for the next debate. I think in particular was a New Hampshire poll that put him over the top. And I will say, Gabby, that several of these recent polls that came out over the weekend show him jumping up a few points, even though he didn't appear in the last debate. Kind of goes to show you how much these debates actually matter.
No, absolutely. I think one of the reasons that he's doing so well is just a look at his policies. He's a really interesting figure because if you compare his campaign to the Elizabeth Warren campaign, which has also been very policy focused, it's an interesting case study in just the originality of the ideas between the two and how what Andrew Yang is proposing is catching the attention of working class Americans, whereas what Elizabeth Warren is proposing might be drawing the attention of, you know, elitist Democrats, the establishment wing of the party, but it's not necessarily driving the enthusiasm that is backing the Andrew Yang surge.
I mean, this jumped down at me. So in Emerson's poll, they asked the question about Yang's central policy plank, the freedom dividend, as he calls it, giving everybody $1,000 a month. They asked, would you be supportive of a universal basic income of $1,000 a month for all U.S. citizens over the age of 18? This is Democratic primary voters, or caucus voters rather. 53% said yes. So a majority support. And the thing that really was incredible to me, Michael, is that this question would not have even been on the table. No one would be polling it. No one would be thinking about it. And certainly you wouldn't have a majority supporting it without having Andrew Yang there making the case. It really just goes to show how influential his campaign, his insurgent campaign, has really been.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew Yang has been really successful at being the happy warrior, and I think he's been the perfect messenger for the UBI. You know, I'm not sure whether I really agree with UBI in kind of the policy prescription of it, but just the way he's been able to talk to voters, go to where voters are and relate to them, I think has been amazing. I mean, I think it's something that candidates down the road could really learn from, because while people may disagree with his policies, there are very few people who can say they don't like Andrew Yang.
That's
right.
That's a real thing.
That's actually true, because in terms of net favorabilities, I think he's the only Democratic candidate with a net favorability amongst Democrats and Republicans. The interesting thing, nationwide. I mean, that is kind of remarkable. I am thinking, Gabby, we've spent a lot of time, we were just talking about Iowa in the last segment, and about where do these Yang people go? Because this was also what Crystal was, which is that when you don't hit 15% in a precinct in Iowa, you kind of disband. So apparently the number 2 choice amongst Yang supporters was that they'll just leave, that they won't
Number
caucus.
1 choice was Sanders.
Bernie.
I think it was like roughly 50% would go to Bernie, and then 20% would just leave. That was the second choice.
So it's a large
The Yang gang is loyal to the
and they're so non-traditional voters. They're new voters. That's kind of the really remarkable thing about this, is he brought people into the process who don't care about the process and actually in some cases don't have any interest in participating, even if he's not.
Well, it speaks directly to the enthusiasm surrounding him as a candidate, because if they feel like there is no alternative that they would feel comfortable supporting, I mean, that really does speak to the sort of just coalition that he has built, the favorability, the bond that he has with his supporters in Iowa. That's a remarkable poll.
I will tell you, I spoke to folks on the ground in Iowa, and they say the energy, no matter where he goes in the state, he draws a great crowd. He gets a great energy. People leave much more willing or more likely to support him than they came in. And like Bernie Sanders and like any of the anti-establishment candidates, his theory of the case is we're going to bring in people that you're not even polling, right? That aren't showing up in these models, that are infrequent voters or have never voted before. So it would not surprise me at all if he outperforms what the polls show him doing right now.
Absolutely. And in a race this close, can you imagine what a Yang endorsement for another candidate would do? I mean, obviously, you know, he's going to run this race for a long time because he's got a lot of money to play with. But his endorsement could really be a tipping factor for someone else.
Absolutely.
Because those voters, like you said, aren't people who are being polled. They're new voters. And so to add those to someone else's ranks could really tip someone over.
That is the one thing that, you know, everybody always focuses on, like, what's going to happen to Amy Klobuchar's voters? Well, I think those are all probably going to go to Joe Biden, right? But, like, we don't really focus on a Tulsi Gabbard voter or a Andrew Yang voter. Remember, we have to remember, Gabby, that 20% of the New Hampshire electorate, Democratic primary electorate, are not Democrats. They're independents or Republicans because they have an open primary system, and those people disproportionately, they love candidates like Yang and Tulsi Gabbard, who are very much outside of the mainstream. I think that Yang and Gabbard both have some of the highest crossover appeal with Trump voters in a state like New Hampshire.
And that's why it's going to be so important to see who they end up endorsing when they do eventually get out of the race. I also just think that Andrew Yang has become a figure that is going to stick in Democratic Party politics. I mean, he is around to stay. He's built some type of coalition that is important and that says something about the state of the Democratic Party and the desire for working class American voters to feel like they have a place in this party. Andrew Yang has made them feel like they do, and I think that he's somebody to keep an eye on, even if he doesn't end up becoming the Democratic nominee.
Well, two things that are interesting to me. I mean, number one, he has maintained like good, positive relationships with all the other candidates. There's been no like ugly fights or weird anything. So I think, you know, he has, speaking to what Gabby is saying here, he has a good relationship with everybody across the board, high favorability, all of that. And I would caution the Sanders campaign about thinking that his voters are just automatically going to go over to them. That's what this really underscored for me, is that, yeah, there's an affinity between some of his supporters and Sanders. You know, they may have been Sanders supporters last time around. Now they're with Yang. But you shouldn't just assume that these are like Bernie supporters in waiting.
No, he reminds me a lot of kind of the Ron Paul-ish candidate for Democrats. You know,
he's got higher support than Ron Paul.
Yeah, I know. But his supporters are with him no matter what. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of his supporters just ended up writing him in down the road, not going with anyone else, because when they're with him, they're with him. And that's how Ron Paul's supporters were.
That's true.
Yeah, I can see that. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate
it.
Thanks.
Tomorrow on Rising, Dr. Tom Frieden, he's going to give us an update on the coronavirus.
Looking forward to that. And also journalist John Nichols, he's going to give us an update from the ground in Iowa. Everybody have a fabulous day. We will see you back here tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.